Welcome to Uncommon Ground. I'm Talal Yassine. My guest today is Catherine Harris, a trailblazing business leader, champion of the arts, and a fierce advocate for women and education. Catherine has built a career that spans retail, public service, and philanthropy. She's the founding director and chairperson of Harris Farm Markets, has held leadership roles in everything from Australia's trade efforts to the boards of major universities and cultural institutions. Her influence stretches across sectors, but her values have always stayed constant. Integrity, fairness, and a belief in lifting others as you lead. In this episode, we talk about the role of family in business, why she believes courage and compassion must go hand in hand. This is a conversation with a woman who's helped shape modern Australia quietly, powerfully, and on her own terms. Let's get into it. Catherine Rossi Harris, welcome to Uncommon Ground.
Lovely to be here.
Great. Let me start from the very start. Catherine Rossi Harris, when she first came to the world, when she first realised that she opened her eyes, 7, 8, 9, some people say 3, me it was about 9. What's your first memories?
First memories, just family, kids, laughter. I was, and looking after younger children.
Yeah.
So I was the second eldest of 10 children. And I have a lot of memories from that time, Talal, because my father was a photographer. I mean, not a professional. He just did it because he loved doing movies and home movies. So I've got so many sort of memories of my life because my dad was a photographer. So there were 10 children, 8 girls and 2 boys. My dad was a successful businessman, and then my mum, fairly early in the piece, when I was about 6, got offered a job as the first woman on television. So she had, at that stage, I think there was about 4 of us. So she had all these babies and television, and Dad worked, and we all just got on with it.
And where did you grow up? Where did...
We grew up in a place, well, mainly Northwood. I was about 10 when we moved to Northwood. We first of all Coogee, and then Dad had asthma, so we went out to the west and suburbs, and then we moved back to Northwood.
And where's Northwood?
Northwood's like
from
Longueville, yes,
Yes.
Longueville, Lane Cove, Northwood, Greenwich.
Lower North Shore, Sydney.
Lower North Shore.
Lower North Shore.
Yeah,
Lower North Shore.
yeah.
And so tell me more about 8 girls, 2 boys living in Northwood. What was that like?
Fantastic. Absolutely fabulous. You know, it's so lovely to look back on your life back. You know, we were very close. We used to fight, of course. I mean, not all kids fight. But we were also because we were all so close in age, there was 10 kids in, I think, 18 years. So, you know, every second year there'd be another one, and we were all looking after each other. For example, I took 3 of my sisters on my honeymoon. They were sort of 2 and 3 and 5, and they came with us on our honeymoon. So it was just, I don't want to make it sound like it was blissful, but bottom line was, Talal, it was. It was beautiful.
Where are you are you number 1?
Number 2.
You're number 2.
Number 2.
You're number 2.
Yeah,
So leadership was a requirement in a family.
Yeah. I had my older sister, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but she was formidable. I mean, she was strong, and she was intelligent, and she was a goer, and she was sort of out there. She was fabulous.
And so tell me, you were Italian family, Rossi's?
Yes. Well,
was your mother Italian?
No, Irish. So, you know, this is what they say is probably totally mad, half Irish, half Italian. But they had been both of Dad's parents were Italian, but they were both born in Australia. So I'm actually 3rd or 4th generation Australian, but a continual Italian line down one side, and Mum's family were first fleeters or second fleeters from Ireland.
The classic Australian story.
The classic Australian story, yes. Yeah.
And so you were number 2 in the family of 10.
10, yeah.
Owed to my family, we got 8 kids, 6 boys and 2 girls.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. And you grew up in Northwood,
Yep.
Lower North Shore. And so tell me, what were your hopes and dreams? What were the things you wanted to do once you went to school and finished up? What was that like?
Do you know, at the time, as I said, I had this wonderful sister who was like the big boss. And, you know, I wasn't a scholar. I wasn't that interested. I was very interested in boys from a very young age. um, and um, and so back then, you just sort of lived in the here and now. You didn't look at what do you want to be or what do you want to. It was all about having fun and, you know, having your school friends around and doing things and playing sport and that sort of thing. It was really in the here and now.
I want to come back to the here and now, but I don't want to go past the fact that you said your mother was the first woman that appeared on TV.
Right.
I'd really like to know more. What's her name?
Right. She had a program. She was approached by the ABC when they were opening up to have a program on television called Women's World. So it was called Mary Rossi's Women's World. And in fact, when the ABC opened, my brother and I were in the opening scene of the ABC when it opened, when the Prime Minister was standing there holding hands with the Prime Minister, who was Menzies, I think, at the time. And so she had this program, a woman's program. And even way back then, I was looking at some footage recently that the ABC and the library had sent me. She was sort of right out there, my mum. I mean, she was a woman graduate way back then when very few women went to university. And she would have people like, she'd be showing a Pierre Cardin dress and she'd say, "Oh, really, ladies, how could anybody expect a woman to wear that? You know, can you imagine criticizing Pierre Cardin?" So she was pretty amazing.
And how long did she have that show for?
She had that show right through until probably the late 60s, and then she was approached by Lloyd Tristino to do a travel. And so she took a group of travellers. It was meant to be 35, and 350 signed up to this trip on a Lloyd Tristino boat. So that's how she then got into travel, and then a few years later she started Mary Rossi Travel.
Wow. I'm strangely familiar with that name.
Oh yes, it was right there. Yes,
Right
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Amazing piece of Australian history.
Yes,
I think,
yeah, yeah.
I certainly didn't connect the two.
Yeah.
And that's how it started.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Going back to Catherine.
Yeah.
So you're living in the here and now. Which school did you go to?
I moved around a little bit, and because I was a bit wayward. Not wayward bad, but just a bit distracted. And I had it's my older sister who, I mean, she was terrific, but Mum thought it would be good if I sort of came from behind, out of her shadows. And so I went to Loreto, Santa Sabina when we lived in Strathfield for a while, and then Loreto Kirribilli, and then we went and lived. Oh, and then I went to Rose Bay Convent, which is where my grandmother had been to school, and Mum thought it would be good for me to sort of be my own self and go to a different school. So I went there, but then you had to board. And we went and lived. Mum decided she wanted us all to find our Italian heritage, so we all went and lived in Florence for a year. And we managed to do that because one of the people Mum interviewed on television was this new shoe company called Ferragamo. And the Ferragamos invited us to go and stay, and then they found us a villa to stay in Florence. I mean, they weren't that famous back in those days like they are now. But that's how, and so we all went as a family. I had to come back to do the school certificate. So I thought, I have to go to boarding school. I'll go back to Rose Bay. So I went Rose Bay, Loreto Kirribilli, and then back to Rose Bay.
Wow. And can you speak Italian now that you've been there?
Oh, un poco solo.
Parlo italiano?
Oh, no, un poco solo.
Yeah, that you had the year in Florence. And so you finished your HSC,
Yes.
matriculation.
Yeah.
And was there any plan at that time?
No, because, and this is where the story starts with the University of New South Wales.
Your great love.
My great love of the University of New South Wales. So, as I said, I was a bit wild. And as they found out later, I was totally dyslexic. And of course, they hadn't heard of dyslexia back in those days, and probably a bit ADHD, if the truth be known, but I've never ever, but definitely dyslexic. And so I never thought of myself as an academic. But when I was at Rose Bay, a friend of mine and I decided this maths that we were doing was too easy, so we did a higher level of maths that women weren't doing. So I was really good at mathematics. But when I did the high school certificate, I actually didn't matriculate because I failed English. And so I never really had any dreams of doing anything in the academic area at all. And then a friend of mine was going out to university, and she said, "Why don't you come with me? I'm going out to enroll in uni." And I went, "Oh, all I'd ever want to do was architecture." So I went out and I went to the architecture table and I said, "I'd like to enroll in architecture." And the bloke looked at my mark and he went, "You haven't matriculated. There's no way." And then I turned around and the table next to it was the commerce table, and there was all these very good-looking blokes at the commerce table. And I went, "I'd like to enroll in commerce." And they looked at my mark and they said, "You haven't matriculated. You can't get into uni." I said, "But look at my mathematics pass." And I had done very well in mathematics. I said, "But look at my mathematics pass." And he went, "Oh, yeah, okay." So he took it and he went and spoke to the dean, and the University in New South Wales enrolled me in commerce. And the very first lecturer, I wrote, we had to do a essay, and he read it and he called me into his office and he went, "It all makes sense. What you've said is right, but it's very hard to read. Why don't you get somebody to type it for you and then they'll fix up all the spelling and everything?" I went, "Oh, great." And then about 6 months later, another university lecturer called me up and he said, "You've got obviously a bit of a problem here with all of this. There's this new course we're running in computer science. Why don't you go and do that as well?" Well, once computers came, I was fixed. I had word processors. I'd just put it down, type it in. They'd fix my spelling. They fixed the thing. And I never looked back, and I ended up graduating in the top 10 of the year, and that's it.
Wow.
So it was absolutely beautiful. And then I went on, of course, with the University of New South Wales, and I became Deputy Chancellor and have always been involved. I'm still on the business school there. But the biggest delight, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? The things that you get little taps on the back of that's nice. But probably the nicest thing that's happened to me is that David Gonski rang me up and he said, We've looked around the university and we noticed that all the buildings and everything around the university are called after men. We're going to start doing something, and they called the courtyard, the Commerce Courtyard, the Kathy Harris Courtyard. Isn't that nice? So, of course, my love of the University of New South Wales is now totally cemented.
So I wouldn't get anywhere in a debate that's raging in our family if I put to you that the University of Sydney is a better university than the University of New South Wales.
That's not what the stat says, especially in commerce.
So we have a raging debate. We're half University of New South Wales, half University of Sydney, like right down the line.
We do too. David's a graduate from Sydney University, or both actually, but he's a graduate from Sydney University and I'm New South Wales, and half our kids have done both. Right. So I think the university system in Australia is so good that we are so lucky in Australia with our education system. It's unbelievable.
Can't agree more.
Yeah.
And both are good institutions for the record.
Yeah. They are.
So going back, so that's the University of New South Wales. Tell me about when you finished university in the top 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
What, career-wise, What happened then? Talk me through it.
Well, so there was a very nice professor that said, "We're so excited. You're the first woman graduate in this course, marketing. Marketing was pretty new then. We're lining up this job." And in the meantime, I'd fallen in love with this bloke called David Harris. And he was sort of weighing up what he wanted to do. And his father, like my father, in his own business, and he was always going to go into his father's business. But during his last year in uni, his father sold his business. And David said, "What am I going to do, Dad?" And his father said, "Son, make it something the big guys don't do well. Make it something that's not going to take too much to get into. Um, and make sure it's a cash business, son." Oh my gosh, don't tell the taxation. But that was in the day the thing. You had to be a cash business. And so David started looking around and we were discussing it. We were about to get married. And he came back and he said, "I found two options, the undertaking business or the fruit and vegetable business." And I said, "Well, I don't want to be the wife of an undertaker." So I guess it's fruit and veg. And we knew nothing about fruit and veg. And he particularly knew nothing because he came from his background is more English, a carrot, a piece of meat and three veg, and was always carrots, beans, potatoes or peas. That was about it. But David's father said to him, "There's this fantastic fruit shop in Chatswood, a bloke called Mayford Morris. Why don't you go and, have a look at that?" So he did. And then Mayford Morris offered to mentor, I suppose, David. So David went and worked there. And I said, "Well, if you're doing that, I'm not going to take this job that I've been offered through the professor at uni. I'll go and work at Grace Brothers to learn something about retail while we're setting up." And I had to earn an income because he obviously wasn't working with Mayford. And so then we found a shop. Somebody approached us about buying a shop. It was out of Villawood. And that's how we started Harris Farm Markets.
Wow, Harris Farm Markets. Going back to Grace Brothers. Grace Brothers, for those listening, was one of the best stores in the country.
It was fabulous.
It closed down.
Again, family-owned business.
Yes.
Yes, they did. They sort of
20 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
That was throughout my childhood. It was loomed large.
Yes, yeah.
I like the Meyer Group now.
It was David Jones and Grace Brothers, and then Meyer later. Yeah.
So I'm fascinated. Harris Farm started in Villawood, my local haunting ground. I grew up in Guildford.
Yeah.
So one block away. So tell me about that. Tell me.
Well, I cannot tell you how. I suppose what an eye-opener it was for David and I. Here we've been, we brought up in this little bubble of niceness. David was head boy at Sydney Grammar and a university graduate. Not exactly what you would say was the traditional fruiterer back in those days. And we were out in Villawood and it was rough street. I mean, it was tough. And even tougher was the markets in those days. It was really tough. And, apart from, well, as you know, starting at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and all hours of the day, David was seen as a total outsider. And, they used to say, well, at least his wife's a bloody Italian, but God, he's not. And, what is this kid? Oh, God, university, he was really, but he managed that.
It's reverse classism, right?
Yes, yeah. It was, and it was cash, and it was dangerous, and it was tough. It was really tough, but he did it. He managed it. I have to tell you, my father was shocked. I mean, because he'd come from, the north of Italy, and he kept on, and after the war, and we're talking not that long after the war, remember, there was a sign I remember seeing once that said, "No dogs, no women, and no Italians allowed." I'm going to find a picture of it and send it to you. So it was really a tough time. And for David to be there and do all that. So my father was shocked that we were going into up. I brought my daughter up. She's got a university degree. And what does she do? She's going to be a bloody everything's going to think she's back into the peasants. And anyway, so there we started Harris Farm. And David realised very quickly into working at Villawood that he went with his mum one day down to the local shop. She lived at Pymble. And he went down to the shop at Pymble and he realised that the carrots that they were selling in Pymble were exactly the same, but not quite as good as the carrots he was selling at Villawood for 1/3 the price of what she was paying in Pymble. And he thought, I'm in the wrong suburb. And so then he went from Villawood, he bought a shop, I think Pennant Hills was our first shop after, and then Mossman. And so then he started catering to a different market. And the focus was on fruit and vegetables. It wasn't a supermarket. It was, and to this day, we say we're more a market than a supermarket. And of course, with the grounding that he had and the tuition he had, he just knew more about fruit and veg than anybody in, to this day, Coles or Woolworths or anybody else. So yeah, so that's how it started.
So that was 1971 in Villawood?
Yes.
And then Pennant Hills a few years later?
Yes. Yeah.
And then Mossman?
Yeah. Then Mossman, and then it grew and grew and grew, and then it grew too fast. And it grew much too fast. And so we had to get some shareholders in and private equity in. They, of course, the first thing they did was get rid of me because you can't have your wife working in the business. So I had to go and start my own business separately, which incidentally ended up being a good thing because it meant that I went and did my thing. But then subsequently that company went broke. So we then tried to buy them back. We got them in to get equity. We had to buy them back. Interest rates were now 17%. Like we talk about it now, they're 4 or 5, 6%, and everybody dies. The standard interest rate was 17%. So it was very tough. And then I had started working with a Japanese company called EIE. They went broke. Harris Farm was going broke, so I then had to go and get paid work somewhere else, while David tried to keep everything together, including having the mafia with a contract on his back, but that's another story. But because it was just so tough, Talal, it was so tough.
Tell me more about the trials and tribulations. It's been 54 years at Harris Farm. Short stint, one would say.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some of the war stories.
Well,
especially with the mafia involved.
That would have been the hardest time. That, when the other company collapsed and we tried to buy them out and it was 17%, and so suddenly David just gave up. He said, and then the bank, it was obviously it wasn't Westpac, it was the bank of one of those big banks, State Bank
of New South Wales.
Went broke. And they were our bankers. And so he finally called in did a scheme of arrangement and called in the people who came in to do it all. And we had a big meeting in the markets and everybody agreed and he would do this and they let him keep trading. But there were one group who decided that they didn't believe in all that bullshit. Just pay us the money, mate. And David knew if he paid one of the suppliers the full amount of money, then every other supplier would be on his back. And so that's when they put a contract out. You either pay the money, mate, or you're gone. So, it was very real and it was very stressful. And I don't know how, it was a fairly long story how we got out of it, but it was, it was a matter of not negotiating because David just refused to negotiate. But he ended up they pulled back as we became more successful again, and we started buying. It was actually Griffith, I don't need to tell you, and we started then buying a lot of oranges. So funnily enough, now, probably 2 generations later, we're quite friendly with that family. Which is amazing, really, isn't it? But, everybody's moved on. But yeah, very, very tough time.
And that was about 2000, the before that?
No, the 90s.
90s.
That was in the 90s.
Yeah.
And since then, it's just been, every time the kids run the business now, which is amazing. And that was, another thing that was a big turning point in our life, that David suddenly went, I'm 65 and our kids are in their 40s. And if I stay as the CEO and the big top honcho, they're going to leave and go somewhere else. At this stage, there were 3 kids, 3 of our 5 children working in the business. So he said, I'm going to move out. I'll stay on the board and I'll stay involved in the fruit and veg thing, but they can be the CEOs. And they all had, they've all had good education and they'd worked other places. We always made them work somewhere else before they came and worked for us. They never got pocket money. You had to work in the shop if you wanted any money. It was typical Italian upbringing.
I'll get back to the kids. That's a really fascinating story about how to raise kids,
Yeah.
and not in that big of a bubble,
Yeah.
little bubble, but
Yeah.
So, in terms, what would you say the lessons of business over half a century, really, that you'd say you'd learn?
I think we learned. I think the first thing we learned early, when we had to bring in another group of shareholders, was to always watch the bottom line. It's so tempting when you're running your own business and you've got people coming in and saying, oh, this is so good, we love this, and the cash register's going click, 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 that you don't actually then dissect it in deep detail about what you're actually doing and how much you're doing it. And I think that was a lesson we learnt that we've, continued to think. I think the temptation to grow is sometimes not such a good idea. And the other thing is, I think one of the big lessons we had, and probably something that in 2000, I came back into the business. I obviously had another career between 90s, between 1990 and 2000. But when I came back in the business, David had rung me up and I'd been offered 3 jobs. And he said, why would you go and offer? One of the jobs was a bloke called Andrew Banks. And he said, why would you go and work for Andrew when you can come and work for me and make money for... And I said, okay, on one condition. If I come back into Harris Farm, we've got to run it like a public company. And so that was my contribution back into the business, that not only had to be the best, that it had to be run like a public company. But the other thing is that when we went broke in the 90s, the thing that we realised is our staff, we had staff that stayed and worked for us for no money. And so from that time, we always treated our staff as an asset, whereas everybody else treated them as a cost. We always saw them as an asset. And it also taught us so much about the joy of diversity in this country. Every time there would be a new influx of immigrants or people or refugees, they'd come and get a job in retail. I mean, retail was the place. And they were such fabulous workers. And so many of them still work for us today. And, that's what I feel so terrible about what happened recently about this anti-immigration things. We as a country have thrived because we're all immigrants. It's only our Indigenous brothers and sisters that we are all immigrants. And it's only by embracing that we enjoy and grow and develop. And that's what Australia's been so good at. And certainly Harris Farmers thrived on that. Yeah.
Tell me about Harris Farm today. How big is it? Where does it operate?
Well, we've got about 3,500 employees now. We've got 33 stores. It's in Queensland, Canberra, and New South Wales, and country New South Wales as well. And I still joke that every time we, decide to build a new business, the kids ring up and say, "Mum, got to mortgage the house again." Typical of big businesses, you never take any money out, you just use it to grow.
And I'm fascinated by this. You're saying the temptation to grow sometimes is not a good one.
Yeah.
Another very wise lady who was my mentor said this quote, and I'm sure she learnt it from somewhere as well. She told me, that's what she said to me, expansion is vanity, profit is sanity. Would you agree?
Wow. I am taking that to the board meeting this afternoon.
Glad to be of assistance.
I love it.
Yeah. And so, because over 50 years, more than 50, 54
Yeah.
years since 1971, you've got 33 stores.
Yeah.
You could have had 300. Over if you added 5 or 10 a year. And so you've obviously resisted it.
Yeah, we just didn't have the money to do that. I mean, because it costs, even though we lease our stores, we don't buy them. We would have been, I wish we had followed Jerry and Katie Harvey and actually bought the land. That would have been really good. But you've still got to build it. It costs a lot of money to build a store, and you don't make money at first. So you've got to fund it into while it grows. Yeah, and then so it's a tough gig. Yeah. Yeah.
And so what are your biggest challenges now? What as chair, what do you worry about?
Well, first of
Not
all,
the mafia, of course.
no, we're friends with them now. What do I worry about? Well, I must say a lot of the things that worry you now is just obviously David looks after, even though he's retired, he still is very involved in the fresh produce. So, funnily enough, climate change is having an impact on fruit and vegetables already in Australia. So I worry about that. I worry about just the amount of care that's got to be taken with occupational health and safety and food safety and all those sort of things that are so important. And the competition, Talal, I mean, it's tough. We've seen what Coles and Woolworths are going through at the moment. And what worries me is having the energy to keep going. Not David and I, we're both retired. I'm standing down as chairperson. And I always was chairperson, not because I was the boss, but because I cared about things like occupational health and safety and all that corporate governance stuff, whereas David just cared about getting on and doing it. And that's why we work so well together, I think.
Well, obviously you make a great partnership, and I want to, with your permission, go back to when you met David and family.
Right.
So you obviously met David at university.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. You sort of meet at university.
Tell me the story.
So he was a bit of a legend. He was a very good sportsman, and he'd been this sort of sporting hero. And I went to a function at Sydney University, and during the course, the boyfriend I was going out with at the moment introduced me to David Harris, and I went, "Oh, so you're the David Harris?" To which he looked at me and said, "Yeah, you want to make something of it?" And walked away, and I thought, "Oh, up you too." Anyway, then we met again the next weekend down at the beach, and we started talking, and then he had decided, and this is where he's an overachiever. He was doing economics at Sydney, but had failed one subject. So he thought, oh, blast, I've got another year at uni now. So what I'll do is I'll do 2 university degrees at once. So he enrolled in marketing at the University of New South Wales, but he didn't tell Sydney University, and he kept doing economics at Sydney. So he did 2 university degrees at once. So we were suddenly at university together. We were best friends. I had another boyfriend, he had a girlfriend, that was it. And one day he said to me, Christo has wrapped up. Do you know Christo the artist?
No.
So Christo is this man that goes around the world wrapping cliffs up and things like that. Amazing, amazing artist, installation artist. And he said, Christo's wrapped up Little Bay. Do you want to go and have a look? And I went, oh, yeah, that would be great. So I went out and I thought, wow, a bloke who would take you to an art installation. And then he said to me, Kath, this is something I want to ask you to do tonight. His girlfriend was living by this stage in America, and he said it was during the Vietnam War years, and he was in the reserve, the Air Force Reserves, and he said, we've got to go and do this debutante ball thing. And he said, would you come? The girl I'm debutanting wants to bring her boyfriend, so I have to bring a girl. It will be dead boring. Do you want to come? So we went. During the night at some stage, he said, would you like to have a dance? And that was it.
You were done.
That was it. We were done. Within about 6 weeks, we were talking about getting married. That was it. Yeah.
And what year was this? When did you get married?
1971, I got married.
1971.
Yeah, so I was only 20 when I got married.
20. And how old was David?
22.
22. Wow.
Yeah.
And so then talk me through the family. So you raised, an ode to my mother, you raised 5 boys.
Yeah.
So my mother has 6 boys and I'm the oldest, and 2 girls. So
Really?
talk me through the family.
So I had 5 boys in 6 years. I know, ridiculous. And it was because David was running his own business and I could go into work with the kids and do all of that. It was a lot of fun. And I didn't really think about it very much because I'd grown up in a great big family. And so we just sort of all batted on and I think were we tough parents? I don't think we were tough parents, but we were sort of like, our kids were all working when they were 14. You want to earn some money? Come and work in the shops. No such thing as pocket money. You know, it was like, come and work in the shop if you want some money. And we forget, Talal, so much. That generation, David's generation, were the sons of men who had just come back from war. And these dads of theirs were determined to bring their sons up tough. They had to be tough because their fathers had seen such horrific things in the war. And so isn't any wonder that generation was blokey and masculine and toxic maxes, all the things, because they were trained to be that because their dads wanted them to be that. And so, you know, the hardest thing for me as a parent now is to get rid of that in my boys. Or not to get rid of it. I think it's quite healthy. But it's quite healthy if it's the other side as well.
What do you mean by that? Talk me through that.
So I worked for 5 years as the Federal Director of Affirmative Gender Equity in Australia. I didn't see it as a fight. I saw it as a learning. We had to learn. We have to learn from each other. The strengths of men and the strengths of women. It's only when we both see and realize both of them that we can succeed. And I think we're seeing that not happen at the moment. It's interesting if you make it a fight as opposed to a tutorial. So my role as Director of Affirmative Action was to help to teach companies how to integrate both. So, for example, you don't have people called chairman, for example, unless they are a man. But the minute you say you're looking for a chairman, then automatically in your head because, and I remember having this argument with John Howard, funnily enough, when he was putting together this thing for the government, and he said, and we'll have 5 different chairmen. And I went, Prime Minister, I think that's probably not the correct term. I think we maybe should just call it chair or chairperson or. And he said, that is the correct name. And so I then went to the Macquarie University and got a lecturer in etymology to find out the derivative of the word chairman. And it was from the chair in the cathedral. That's where the term chairman came from. And so it was chairman because the person who sat in the chair in the cathedral was always a man. And if it had been a woman, the correct term would have been chairwoman. So to John Howard's, quite good on him, he said, okay, we'll make a presiding member. So he changed. But it was little things like that where people had to learn, foreman. How obvious was that term, foreman? It was about learning how to integrate and appreciate more about how we could leverage off each other, how we can both learn from each other. And my concern is that somebody said, by being too aggressive, you get the other side arcing up. And so just recently we're seeing people like this guy, Andrew Tate, that's infiltrating into boys' schools and things like that. And people saying, oh, it's all gone too far. It hasn't gone too far. We're not there yet. And I just think that we have to be careful that we do it in a way that appreciates both. And I recently saw there's a school in Iceland where it's in one of their junior classes, and one day a week they break the class into girls and boys. And the girls are all taught outside, playing ball, climbing rocks, throwing things at each other, getting tough, doing lifts up, doing that. And the boys are all pulled aside and they're taught to do things like having a one-on-one conversation with each other, asking people, teaching them how to do massage, teaching them how to treat and care for each other. It's an amazing, what an interesting experiment to do. One day a week, the boys are taught girls' schools and the girls are taught boys' schools. And it's quite interesting that my feeling is we need to get this together and get it right. And some of our, you and I come from very different cultures. Both of them are bad with women.
Indeed. And you've done a lot of work for many years in the gender equity, from a gender equity perspective.
Yeah.
Do you think it's improving or going backwards in Australia?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Just at the moment, I'm a bit worried about it. Donald Trump hasn't helped that. I do worry about it. I don't think it's going backwards because there are too many remarkable women. But it's still hard, and it's really hard for women. I mean, we can't sacrifice having babies, but how can you run? I've got this gorgeous daughter-in-law who's 35. She's now got 2 little children. She's on the board of Telstra. She's running her own business. How can you do it all? So I'm very proud. One of my sons is saying, well, I'll have a year off. I'm ready for a year off. I'll look after. But so we've got to change the dynamics. We've got to help with children's education. That's where we've got a long way to go.
I want to combine the two, Harris Farm and family, because they're intertwined in your world.
Yeah.
And I guess some lessons about family working together
Yeah.
And being family, you can pick your family.
Yeah.
You can't pick your family, but you can certainly pick who you work with.
Yes. Yeah.
And as a family, you've chosen to work together for a very long time.
Yeah.
That brings its own dynamic. So it's very
Yeah.
unique over
Yeah.
a long period.
Yeah.
What lessons have you learned? What advice would you give?
I think the most important thing is fairness and transparency. Does that make sense? Fairness and transparency, that you have to be open and share things, um, and you have to be fair. So I think that's the most important thing. Um, and of course, there are always conflicts, um, but you have to work through them. I remember when David stepped down, we couldn't, because at that stage there were three of the boys working in the business at a very high level. Um, and David said, "Well, who are we going to make CEO?" And um, I just been away with a guy who was running one of the big consulting firms, and I said, "Oh, we've got this problem. We've got three sons. What do you do?" And I said, "We're thinking of making them all joint CEOs." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, I've only got one company that I'm doing this for, but all I can say is get a mentor for them." So we did get a mentor, and that was, I don't know, probably 10, 15 years ago now. They've still got the same mentor. So they still meet with him every Tuesday, and that has really helped, um, of them, three of them working together. And then Tristan's decision to leave was his own. He was in his 50s, suddenly said, I want to do my own thing. So that was really nice. And he's still running things, and, he's still part of the board and things like that. But I think, I think that's the important thing. At one stage, the boys started going, "Oh, it's starting to get a bit stressful. We're all fighting with each other." And we decided that we actually might sell the business. This was about 10 years ago. No, not even 10 years ago, 7 years ago. And so we put out the feelers. And just before we were settling, um, a friend of mine met me in the street and she said, "Oh, Kathy," she said, "I really want to thank you. We've got a program that looks after kids with intellectual disabilities. And it just is a wonderful program that, these kids are." And it started because my sister's daughter lost her job in one of those factories where they used to employ those kids. And we said, "We can give Sarah a job." And so we started this program with a company, an organisation, government organisation called Job Support, which is so good. And they help, they integrate them, they teach you how to manage them. We're now the biggest employer of those sort of kids now. Anyway, she said, "You've changed his life and you've changed mine." And I said to David, "If we sell this business, we'll lose that program." And David said, "Well, I've never wanted to sell the business." And the three boys came to us and they said, "We wanted to sell because we were all sort of beginning to fight with each other. But suddenly we realised that, like, Tristan is really good at all the merchandising and all of that field. And Angus knows banking more than anybody on earth, and he's done all the IT stuff. And Luke knows every employee in the market and is terrific at the property. Why are we separating?" So we didn't sell.
Wow, that's a fascinating story. Because families, and my family included, work together in different
Did they?
configurations.
Yeah.
Two or three of us were very close, and another two were close work
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
But I mean, it becomes, if you're fighting with each other, if there's conflict, and there's always conflict, there
Of
has
course
to be.
there is conflict. Yeah.
It does become very uncomfortable at the Sunday, or whenever you have dinner, or the Wednesday nights or the Sunday, or especially when you all get married and you have kids and
Yeah,
you've got
yeah.
the pressures.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how you deal with that, because people will be fascinated how you managed it. Like, who called time? Who said, "Okay, that's enough of that. We're gonna." Apart from mentoring, did that ever come to a head?
Mentoring. Well, I think it's been that they had to face that in their mentoring because they were doing it every week. Um, when I say mentoring, it's almost like an adjudicator. So he was totally independent, is totally independent, and they just work it out and nut it out. And So, no. And I think also David and I refused to listen to them complaining about the other one. Sometimes we go, yeah, he's a bloody pain in the neck. But yeah, so look, Talal, you say this and then 10 minutes later you could have a terrible blue, but so far it's been okay. I mean, as I said, they've fought over things. There's no question about it. And we've thought over things. Um, but eventually it all works out. Yeah.
Catherine, I guess it's a testament to you and David for over half a century and of founding the business and having kids to come into the business, which have been at least a couple of decades, where you've not only run a successful business and gone through the up highs and lows, but stuck together because it's a really tough gig.
It's a tough gig, but I think the other thing is, it makes it sound like we're really close, but in actual fact, part of the reason for our success is we are really close, but we let everybody be themselves. We encourage everybody where we can to be themselves. I try, Mother Hen goes, why don't you all come and do this? And they go, Mum, we've got other families. Mum, we're doing this. Mum, But I think that's one of the important things, that you don't spend too much time, um, which is going to be sad for me because I don't have any daughters to look after me when I'm old.
Moving on to Catherine Harris, the woman.
Yeah.
My friend and fellow director on the Taronga Zoo board, where we met. But when I learned a little bit more about Catherine Harris, I guess I discovered a lot about you that is not in the public sphere at all. And because you're so humble and not a shameless promoter like myself,
You're not.
I really want to talk. I want you to talk me through some of the really cool things you've done, and start with, I guess, your relationship. For example, you're the consul for Bhutan. How did that happen?
How that happened was that, again, through the markets, the Department of Foreign Affairs rang David and said, there's a guy from Bhutan, he wants to start a Mandarin industry. Will you look after him? So David takes him through the markets for the day. And at the end of the day, David said, well, was that helpful? And he says, oh, Mr. Harris, very helpful. And he says, of course, the biggest problem we have is when the pickers go into the field, they get eaten by the tigers. And David went, right, now where is Bhutan exactly? This is after a day. And he rings me up on the old-fashioned telephones in those days, and he went, there's a bloke here from Bhutan. I'm going to bring him home for dinner. We've got to speak to this guy. And so the kids and I are looking it up on a globe and a thing and finding out about Bhutan. So this is in the early 80s. He comes to dinner. We're fascinated. So we got an opportunity to go to Bhutan through a business group, and we just absolutely loved it so much that we decided we'd take the kids back. So we then organised all the children and we went back. And it was 2 years later we went back again. It was still the mid-80s. And our names at the hotels we stayed at were still at the top of the page. They had so little tourism. And they had this rule that they only allowed they didn't want sort of ravaging backpackers coming through because they didn't want to ruin the culture of Bhutan. So we absolutely loved it. And when the 2000 Olympics came up, everybody was getting all these great gigs where you were the attaché for a country. And if you were the attaché, you got free tickets, you got a car and driver, you got to look after your team, da-da-da. And David said, Bhutan. And you've got to go and tell Michael Knight that he's got no women attachés, you're going to be for Bhutan. So Michael Knight wrote to Bhutan and said Catherine Harris would like to be it. And they said, oh, that would be great. This is only about 2 weeks before, but what does an attaché do? Anyway, they all came out, and the Bhutanese were just amazing. I ended up marching for Bhutan with Bhutan team in the Olympics. But they created such a spirit of love, and I think we had a party for the Bhutanese and we invited a whole lot of people and everybody, and it was written up in the paper, this was the best party of the thing. Of course, they were so giving, they were so friendly and out there, and so we just absolutely loved it. And then shortly after that, I got a letter from the then Prime Minister to say, we get asked often if somebody could represent and be the consul for thing, but it's only 3 countries that we actually ask somebody to be, and we were wondering if you would be the consul general for Bhutan in Australia. So that's how I got the gig. It wasn't a very hard gig, I can tell you. It was pretty easy because the students that came out here at that time they were beautiful, and they've mixed in at universities, and I'd go out to the universities and say, how are they going? And they say, oh, the great thing about them is that they're dying to learn and take everything back to Bhutan. Sadly, not just Bhutanese, but so many, we don't think about it in Australia, but our policy of educating all these young, fabulous kids that come out here to learn, so many stay in the country. And it becomes a brain drain to so many foreign countries. And I think that's happening to Bhutan and many countries now. But at the time, it was easygoing and beautiful. We absolutely fell in love with Bhutan, and nothing's changed. I mean, they were the first country. They always measured gross domestic, not gross domestic product like we do. They measure gross domestic happiness. And so your country is successful if it is financially doing okay, if it is looking after the environment, if the people are healthy and well. So gross domestic happiness was what they measure.
And the smile on your face says it all.
Yeah. Oh, they're amazing. I love them. And,
And so, what as general counsel, what you practically did? You attend functions and
Um,
soirees?
I
You
did,
stand scenes?
yes, and sort of helped to influence the government, because the government was giving away a lot of Commonwealth scholarships in those days. So educating young Bhutanese, and when they'd come out to Australia, assisting with anything and trying to set up trade. It was too hard trying to set up trade. There wasn't a lot of trade that we can do, but with tourism and things like that, it wasn't a big job. I mean, it was funnily enough, and I think this says it all about the Bhutanese. I think it was about 5 years ago, the Minister for Foreign Affairs was out in Australia, and we're having lunch with the head of DFAT, and the head of DFAT looked at me and said, Mrs. Harris, you've been a long time in the role of Consul-General. And I said, 20 years. And I looked at the thing and I said, Kesang, I think 20 years, I'm getting too old for this job. I think it's time you get somebody else as the consul. And he turned around and he looked at the head of the Foreign Affairs and he went, we have a saying in Bhutan that if a relationship is working very well, the person who breaks the relationship has lifelong bad luck.
So he's definitely.
So I kept the job until we ended up with a formal ambassador in Australia. So
That's a fascinating story.
Yeah,
It's a fascinating story. And so tell me about Catherine Harris, board director, activist, Bargara, New South Wales, if I recall correctly. I may be making this up.
No, National Gallery.
I'm sorry,
National Gallery. And the Museum of Contemporary Art.
And the Museum of Contemporary Art.
Yeah.
Taronga Zoo.
Yeah.
NRL. Various roles in the NRL.
Yeah.
What's your driving passion with all these?
I've always loved the arts. Like, as I said, right back as a child, the other subject I did at school was art. I loved art, and that's why I wanted to do architecture when I went to enroll in uni, but they didn't want to have me. So I've always loved art and the arts, and realised how underfunded it was. We lived at Northwood, we lived opposite Lloyd Rees, who was just like a legend, and he used to come and paint off my mum and dad's. And so as a little young girl, I used to go and sit in his studio and paint with Lloyd Rees, which is just, unbelievable. So I've always loved the arts. My interest in Well, obviously, I'm also interested in the environment and things like that. I've been on the board of Grand Collar and things like that. Um, my interest in rugby league came because Dawn Fraser was our local member, and I became very close friends with Dawn through John Singleton, who was our neighbour. And he said to me, "Come on, Kathy, you've got to come and help Dawny." And I said, "I don't know anything about politics, Singo. I don't know anything. I don't know the difference between Liberal and Labor." And he said, "That's great because she's an independent." Anyway, so I spent, a lot of time with Dawny and helping Dawny. And so when they were starting up the Rugby League Commission, and one of my jobs in looking after Dawny during an election period was to go with her every weekend, either to the pub or and she went to the rugby league every weekend. And so when the commission was set up and they were looking for somebody, they wanted a woman on the commission. And my name came up through the headhunter. And of course, when my name came up through the headhunter, I knew all the blokes because I'd been with Dawny, and they went, "Oh, Kath Harris, yeah, yes." So that's how I got the gig with rugby league. And it was only when I actually got involved with rugby league that I realised what a force for good it was. Everybody sees all the terrible things that the spotlight on the bad things that happens. As a mother of sons, boys do terrible things, and there's a bloody lot of them, rugby league. But when you think about it, the vast majority are really good men, and they contribute to their community, and they encourage kids. And what rugby league has done with the Indigenous people, and how they've recognised it, and how they help country towns, and how they. So I've been when I got involved, I just realised what an impact sport has on communities. So I've been very keen admirer. And the other thing about it is, Talal, when people are critical of the odd, and it is the odd, misdemeanor, or not just misdemeanor, bad stuff that young men do, is that unlike the vast majority of us, these guys are so famous. They're more famous. Like, you could have, famous film stars walking down the street and people will go, "Is that or isn't it?" But if it's, Jonathan Thurston or Wayne Pearce or somebody walking, they go, "There's Wayne Pearce." And they feel they own them. They feel they can walk up to them and put their arm around them and take photos. I went from the car park one day at the stadium over to the thing, and there were 7 photos I had taken because I was standing next to Wayne Pearce. People came up, "Cole, can we have a selfie, Wayne? Can we have a selfie?" The spotlight on these young people is more than a film star. And so that's why they get, obviously, everything they do is out there. So I just loved working in it. And the other difference was the difference between working in rugby league and corporate Australia, of which I was now doing boards and things like that, was that most of the people who worked in rugby league, they hadn't had the privileged upbringing and things that I had had. All their mums worked. They treated women as equals, which really surprises people. But it was just working in that atmosphere where you were treated as an equal was so different to just being, the obligatory female on the board. So that was my thing. And then I finished I did 7 years, I think, as commissioner. That was enough because I'd seen enough footy by that stage. But then just recently I was approached to be on the board of the New Guinea team. So again, the potential, what I loved about that was the geopolitical aspect, the closeness that can be built between New Guinea and Australia again, and the good that it can do to a community. Our chairperson just sent around a video recently of them going out into sort of a province in Papua New Guinea, and they roll up, and these kids are all playing rugby league on this dirt ground, and their football is literally just like a grey, all the paint's off it, and it's all scratched and thing. And they chatting to these kids, and then they pull out a brand new football and give it to them. Well, you would think they had been given, it was unbelievable, the joy in these kids. So you can, just a little thing can make maybe such a big difference.
With all my guests, I ask a number of quizzical but short questions. Don't think about it too much.
Okay.
It's your first response. And the first one is, I guess, what is the greatest misconception about Catherine Harris?
That I run Harris Farm Markets? That's not true anymore. And that's definitely not true anymore. I mean, when I think of my husband, who's just a genius, but, he'd no more sit down and have this conversation until, no, I don't want to do that.
To run a farm.
Yeah, I'm running the farm. So that's probably the thing. And the other one is, funnily enough, we were talking about women's rights, and I don't feel I fought for. People often say you fought for women's rights. I see the women before me that came, the bra burning feminists of they were the ones who fought. They fought to get a voice. I took what they did and sort of interpreted it for corporate Australia. And I remember the first time when I came into the position, 2 years there was a change of government, and one of the grounds the government was going to change was because they were going to get rid of the affirmative action agency, the gender equity, and one of the pushes of that was the Business Council of Australia. So as soon as there was a new government, the Business Council invited me down, and I'm sitting at this table with all the board of the Business Council, and I'm sitting next to this bloke, and he's a great big guy, and he goes, I see you're a UNSW, a bit like you, asking that question. And I said, yes, I noticed you were a Sydney. And he said, yes. And he's a huge guy. And I said, and I bet you played footy for Sydney University. And he said, I did. And I said, well, I bet you I know more about footy than you do. And he looked at me like, who's this public servant treating me like that? He looked at me and said, I'll have you know I am on the board of the New South Wales Blues or whatever it was. And I went, I'll have you know I watch 7 games every Saturday. I have to watch my 5 boys play, and then I have to stay and watch the first and second 15. To which he then burst out laughing. We ended up great friends. And he and the rest of the board, and then we just then had opened the dialogue so we could discuss. I had to name companies who were not doing the legislation. They'd only ever named 10 companies. When I had my first one, I named 200 companies, and Kim Beazley looked at me and she said, they'll throw the legislation out, Kath, you can't do this. And I went, no, the Business Council, we named the 200 best companies as well. And it just changed the dialogue. So I didn't fight for women's rights. I just helped it. But those amazing women before me, they were the ones. They were the ones who had to really do the battle.
What's Catherine's guilty pleasure?
Lying in bed instead of getting up at this time and coming and talking to you. And I read the papers from cover to cover. And then I play a bit of Sudoku or something like that. That's my guilty pleasure.
That's it. No chocolate, no wine,
Oh, a glass of wine. That's not guilty pleasure.